The shrill ring of my cell phone pierced the silence of my home office, startling me from my work. I glanced at the caller ID, Richard. My husband never called during work hours. "Emily, I need you to come to the hospital right away." His voice trembled, a sound I'd never heard from my usually stoic partner. My heart raced as I grabbed my keys. "What happened? Are you okay?" It's Claire. There's been an accident." The world tilted on its axis. My sister? But why was Richard with her? I sped through traffic, my mind a whirlwind of questions and fears. When I burst through the emergency room doors, I spotted Richard pacing in the waiting area, his suit rumpled and his face ashen. "Richard, what's going on? Where's Claire?" He turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. "They won't tell me anything. I'm not family." "But why were you with her? I thought you had that big meeting today." Richard's gaze dropped to the floor. I canceled it. Claire asked me to help her look at houses." A chill ran down my spine. "Houses? What are you talking about?" Before he could answer, a doctor approached. "Are you Emily? Claire's sister?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Your sister's in surgery. The car accident caused significant internal bleeding." The room spun. "Car accident? But how?" Richard's hand on my arm steadied me. "It was my fault," he whispered. "I was driving." I jerked away from him, pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve falling into place. The late nights at work, the hushed phone calls, the sudden interest in real estate. As the doctor continued explaining Claire's condition, I stared at my husband, a stranger wearing a familiar face. What other secrets was he hiding? And how had I been so blind? I paced the hospital corridor, my mind reeling from the events of the past few hours. Claire was out of surgery, but still unconscious. Richard sat slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. "Emily?" My mother's voice cut through the haze. I turned to see Helen rushing towards me, her face etched with worry. "Mom, I'm so glad you're here." I collapsed into her arms, finally letting the tears flow. She held me tight, then pulled back to look at me. "What happened? Your message was so cryptic." I glanced at Richard, who hadn't moved. "Claire and Richard were in a car accident. They were house hunting together." Helen's brow furrowed. "House hunting? Why on earth?" "That's what I'd like to know," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Richard finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Emily, I can explain." "Not now," I hissed. "Not here." A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Thompson? Your sister is awake. She's asking for you." I hesitated, torn between my need for answers and my concern for Claire. Helen squeezed my hand. "Go. I'll stay with Richard." Claire's room was dim, the only sound the steady beep of monitors. She looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, her face bruised and swollen. "Em?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I moved to her side, taking her hand. "I'm here, Claire. You're going to be okay." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Claire's grip on my hand tightened. "Richard and we've been seeing each other. For months, the house, it was supposed to be for us." The room spun as the truth I'd been denying crashed down around me. My sister and my husband. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. "Emily, please," Claire pleaded. "Say something." But I had no words, only a burning desire for revenge against the two people I'd trusted most in the world. I stumbled out of Claire's hospital room, my world crumbling around me. The sterile hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, my legs barely carrying me forward. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. "Mrs. Thompson?" A gruff voice asked. "This is Detective Simmons. We need you to come down to the station regarding the accident involving your husband and sister." My heart raced. What's this about? I thought it was just a car accident. "Ma'am, there are complications. Please come as soon as possible." I hung up, my mind reeling. What else could possibly go wrong? At the station, Detective Simmons led me to a small room. "Mrs. Thompson, we found something unusual at the accident scene." He slid a photo across the table. "Do you recognize this?" I gasped. It was a positive pregnancy test. "We believe it belonged to your sister," he said gently. The room spun. Claire was pregnant with Richard's baby? "There's more," Simmons continued. "The accident, it wasn't an accident. The brake lines were cut." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you saying?" "Someone wanted them hurt, Mrs. Thompson, or worse." As I left the station, my phone rang again. It was Helen. "Emily, you need to get back to the hospital now. Richard's awake, and he's asking for you." He says he knows who tried to kill them. I froze, my hand on the car door. Who would want Richard and Claire dead? And why? As I drove back to the hospital, my mind raced with possibilities. Was there someone else involved in their affair? A jealous ex? Or was it something more sinister? One thing was certain. My perfect life was gone, replaced by a web of lies, betrayal, and now attempted murder. And I was caught right in the middle of it all. The hospital corridor seemed endless as I made my way to Richard's room. My mind raced with questions, each step bringing me closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I pushed open the door to find Richard propped up in bed, his face a patchwork of cuts and bruises. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I thought I knew. "Emily," he croaked, reaching for my hand. I flinched away. "You said you know who tried to kill you," I said, my voice cold. "Start talking." Richard's eyes darted around the room. "It's complicated, Em. I've gotten mixed up in something dangerous." "More dangerous than sleeping with my sister?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. He winced. "I deserve that. But this is bigger than us. The company I've been working for, they're not what they seem. I found out they've been laundering money, and when I threatened to expose them, they came after me." My head spun. What does Claire have to do with this? She overheard a conversation. They must have thought she knew too much. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "Why didn't you come to me? We could have faced this together." Richard's face crumpled. "I was trying to protect you, but I made everything worse." A knock at the door interrupted us. A nurse entered, pushing a wheelchair. "Mr. Thompson, it's time for your physical therapy." As they helped Richard into the chair, I noticed his legs didn't move. The nurse caught my gaze. "The accident caused significant spinal damage. We're not sure yet if he'll walk again." The weight of everything crashed down on me. My cheating husband, my pregnant sister, both now disabled, a dangerous corporation out for blood, and me, caught in the middle of it all. As Richard was wheeled away, he called out, "Emily, please, I need your help. We're not safe." I stood there, torn between my anger and the urge to protect. In that moment, I realized I had to make a choice that would change everything. The weeks following the accident blurred together in a haze of hospital visits and rehab appointments. I found myself shuttling between Richard and Claire, tending to their needs while my own life crumbled around me. One particularly grueling day, I wheeled Richard into our living room, now transformed into a makeshift hospital ward. He glared at me, his eyes cold and unfamiliar. "You're late," he snapped. "I've been sitting in that damn chair for hours." I bit back a retort, reminding myself of his pain. "I'm sorry, Richard. Claire's therapy ran long." His face twisted. "Claire, Claire, Claire? It's always about her, isn't it?" "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "You're probably glad this happened," he spat. "Now you can play the martyr, taking care of your poor, crippled husband and sister." His words hit me like a physical blow. "How dare you? After everything I've done." "Everything you've done?" Richard laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but make me feel like a burden. Maybe if you'd been a better wife, none of this would have happened." I stared at him, shocked. This wasn't the man I married. Or was it? Had I been blind all along? Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know what Richard did. Meet us at the pier at midnight if you want the truth." My heart raced. Could this be connected to Richard's cryptic warnings about his company? I looked at my husband, seething in his wheelchair, then back at my phone. In that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. Stay in this toxic environment, or risk everything to uncover the truth. "I'm going out," I said, grabbing my keys. Richard's eyes widened. "Where?" "Emily, don't do anything stupid." But I was already out the door, my mind made up. It was time to take control of my life, no matter the consequences. The pier loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the night sky. My heart pounded as I approached the shadowy figure waiting at the end. "Mrs. Thompson?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar and tense. I nodded, my throat dry. "Who are you?" She stepped into the dim light. "Anne Wilkins. I worked with Richard at the company." My stomach clenched. Another woman from Richard's life I knew nothing about. "What do you know about my husband?" I demanded. Anne's eyes darted around nervously. "Richard wasn't just laundering money, he was embezzling it too. Millions. And he wasn't alone." She handed me a USB drive. Everything's here. Bank records, emails, photos, including evidence of his relationship with your sister. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How long? Years, Anne whispered. I'm so sorry. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt behind us. 2 men in dark suits emerged, guns drawn. Run! Anne shouted, pushing me towards the edge of the pier. Without thinking, I leaped into the icy water, clutching the USB drive. Gunshots rang out above me as I swam desperately for the shore. Soaking and shivering, I stumbled home, my mind reeling. I needed to see the files, to know the full extent of Richard's betrayal. As my laptop whirred to life, I inserted the drive with trembling hands. File after file confirmed Anne's words. Money trails, incriminating emails, and then photos. Dozens of them. Richard and Claire, locked in passionate embraces. Date stamps going back 5 years. Before our wedding. Before everything. A sob caught in my throat as the final piece clicked into place. Claire's pregnancy. The house they were buying. They had been planning to run away together, taking the stolen money with them. My world collapsed around me. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. I had to confront them both, consequences be damned. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. It was time to end this once and for all. I stormed into the hospital, my heart pounding with rage and betrayal. The evidence on the USB drive burned in my pocket, a damning testament to years of lies. Claire's room was first. She looked up as I entered, her face pale and drawn. Em? What's wrong? I slammed the photos on her bed. How long, Claire? How long have you been sleeping with my husband? Her eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears. Emily, Save it, I spat. I know everything. The affair, the embezzlement, the baby. You were going to run away together, weren't you? Claire's sobs echoed through the room. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened. It just happened for 5 years? I laughed bitterly. You're pathetic. Leaving her crying, I marched to Richard's room. He was struggling to sit up in bed when I burst in. Emily, thank God! I've been so worried. I cut him off, throwing the USB drive at him. It's over, Richard. I know everything. His face drained of color. You don't understand. I did it for us. For us? I screamed. You stole millions, cheated on me with my sister, and nearly got yourself killed. How is that for us? Suddenly, 2 men in suits appeared in the doorway. Mr. Thompson, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. As they handcuffed Richard to his hospital bed, he pleaded with me. Emily, please, I love you. Don't let them take me. I stood there, torn between years of love and the crushing weight of betrayal. In that moment, I realized I held not just Richard's fate in my hands, but my own. With a deep breath, I turned to the detectives. I have evidence that might help your case. Richard's anguished cry followed me as I walked away, my heart breaking with each step. I had lost everything, but in that loss, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. 6 months after Richard's arrest, I stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. Gone was the naive wife, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and finally free. The doorbell rang. It was Mom, looking tired but determined. Ready for this? She asked. I nodded, grabbing my purse. Today was Claire's release from the rehab center, and somehow I'd become the designated caretaker. As we drove, Mom broke the silence. Emily, I'm so proud of you, the way you've handled everything. You're incredible. Tears pricked my eyes. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. At the center, Claire sat in her wheelchair, her eyes downcast. When she saw us, her face crumpled. Em, I'm so sorry. For everything. I took a deep breath, years of hurt and betrayal worn with the love I still felt for my sister. I know, Claire, we have a long way to go, but we're family. We'll figure it out. As we settled Claire into Mom's guest room, my phone buzzed. A text from Jack, my business mentor, turned something more. Dinner tonight? I smiled, a flutter of excitement in my chest. Can't wait, I replied. Later, as Jack and I walked along the beach, hand in hand, he turned to me. You know, Emily, you're the strongest person I've ever met. After everything you've been through, you're still standing, still caring for others. I gazed out at the setting sun, reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the pain, the struggle to rebuild, but also the discovery of my own resilience, the deepening of my relationship with Mom, and the unexpected joy of new love. I'm not just standing, I said, squeezing Jack's hand. I'm thriving. As we walked on, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. my future, on my terms. The old Emily had died in the wreckage of betrayal and lies, but from those ashes, a new Emily had risen. Stronger, wiser, and finally, truly happy.